Hello. So today we're going to talk about ballpoint pens versus gel ink pens. So the first thing to know is that back in the old days, pens had either tips that you dipped into a vat of ink and drew it up, or then the new modern style pens had ink that you screwed into the back of them. You can see it in here. So that's a little ink tube. You screwed it in. This would actually puncture the ink tube, and then when you wrote, this double thing pair of metal pieces would squish apart and the ink would flow down. So nowadays we call these things calligraphy pens. And they are used for doing pretty calligraphy, which I like to do around the holidays. But these are, for most people, a royal pen to use for everyday drawing, sketching, and note-taking because they can be very messy and a little harder to get the hang of. You know, clearly I like them, but I don't use them every day for doing my writing of notes. So the types of pens that people use in modern days are pens that have a ball at the bottom of them. So the two main kinds are called ballpoint, which there's a little tiny ball right at the tip of this. So the ink is up here in a tube, and it comes down, and that little ball rolls on the paper, and the ink sort of flows out around the edges of the ball as it rolls. And then the other kind that a lot of people use is gel ink pens, and it actually is also got a ballpoint. So it's got a little ball on the inside of there that rolls as you're sliding it over. But the reason they call this gel ink and not just ballpoint is that there's a different kind of ink in there. So you would think they would go back and rename this one to something more distinguishable, but you know how these things go. The one that gets there first often takes over the name, and then other things have to adjust after that. So this ballpoint has an oil-based ink in it, and the ink is fairly thick. So let's put a piece of paper out here. This is just regular sketch paper. So it's a ballpoint, but it's an alcohol-based ink with some fatty acids and stuff in there. And the ink flows down while you're making the ball turn. And the downside is because the ink is fairly thick, it takes, we'll say, a fair amount of pressure to write. And sometimes this is good if you've got the old-fashioned kinds of carbon paper and stuff and you're trying to write through multiple layers of things. Then because you have to press down fairly hard, it's going to get through the multiple layers. But really, I mean, nobody uses carbon paper anymore. We have all sorts of new technologies. So I find these really annoying to use because you have to press down hard. If I'm writing for a long time, it gets very tiring on my hand and my fingers and so on. But that's the cheap kind of pen that you see when you go into banks and schools and all that other kind of stuff. What I tend to prefer is also technically a ballpoint, but it has inside of it gel ink. So these happen to be by UniBall Signo, and I super like this squishy version. It's got the same ink inside of these, which have the non-squishy hard plastic version. So what I do is buy bunches of these cheap ones, yank out the innards, and put them into these, which then leaves me with lots of innards I have to figure out what to do with. So I'm going to make a series about things that you could do with empty pens or dead pens and stuff. But that's a project for a different day. So the idea of gel, and these happen to be a little bit dead, which is another project I'm going to work on, is how to revitalize dead gel pens. So the gel ink is made up of pigment and water, and it flows just so much more smoothly. And because the ink is thinner, these come in all sorts of different sizes, like the thickness of the line. So it can come in very thin thicknesses and very thick thicknesses. So in terms of doing art projects, you can get a whole range of the pens and all sorts of different colors. So there are, in general, many, many more options for working with gel pens. And that's part of the appeal for me. But the main appeal for me is that they are just so smooth to draw. You can have a nice light touch, and it still comes out very dark. And I like that it's dark, that it's clear, that it's easy to work with, and doesn't cause stress because you're not having to bear down to get the ink to come out of it. And when I go to the art gallery on Saturdays, and I have these pens for people to sign in to the, when they're dropping off art or picking up art or stuff like that, they are always so happy when they draw with it. And they ask me questions about where did I get it and how did they get their hands on them. So people definitely notice the difference between working with a gel pen versus working with a ballpoint pen. And even just going back and forth between these, I can feel the difference between a lighter touch and then the heavier touch needed to make something that's even as dark. So those are the differences. These are cheaper. You're saving money by getting those. And they are, for many years, have been the standard. This is the way that things just were. These are more expensive, but, we're not talking thousands of dollars more expensive. We're talking, like $1 or $2 more expensive. And they make a much darker lines, much smoother to write, and come in a much wider variety of thicknesses that they can make the line and color options. So those are the two main options that I choose from when I'm doing drawing projects. Let me know if you have any questions, and clearly I'm going to start doing a bunch of videos about how to deal with dead pens and ideas for them, because I have massive numbers and I hate to throw things out. So I will see what kinds of uses I have. If you have any ideas for me, please let me know.